The text message arrived at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a rainy Thursday afternoon while I was organizing files in the modest cubicle that had been my workspace for the past 18 months. Hope you can still afford dinner tonight, Sofia. Heard about the layoffs at your little nonprofit. Maybe it's time to consider a real career like mine at Sterling Financial. See you at Mom's birthday party. Try not to look too unemployed. Marcus. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at the screen of my phone, watching the raindrops streak down the window of our cramped office space in downtown Portland. Around me, my colleagues at Community Development Partners continued their quiet work, completely unaware that in 3 hours, I would be sitting across from my cousin Marcus at our grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, listening to him explain once again why my job was a dead end, and his position as senior vice president at Sterling Financial Group made him the family success story. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that the little nonprofit he loved to mock had just received confirmation of something that would change everything. The email in my inbox, marked confidential and urgent, contained information that would make this evening's family gathering far more interesting than anyone anticipated. My name is Sofia Ramirez, and for the past 4 years, I had been working at Community Development Partners, a nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing initiatives across the Pacific Northwest. To most of my family, especially my cousin Marcus, this represented everything wrong with my life choices. While he climbed the corporate ladder at Sterling Financial, earning what he constantly reminded everyone was a 6-figure salary, I was playing social worker for what he assumed was barely above minimum wage. The truth was more complicated, but I had learned long ago that trying to explain the nuances of nonprofit work to Marcus was like attempting to teach calculus to someone who insisted that mathematics was just elaborate guessing. My role as senior program director involved coordinating multi-million-dollar housing projects, managing relationships with city governments, and overseeing initiatives that had housed over 3,000 families in the past 2 years alone. But because my business cards didn't say vice president and my office didn't have floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus had categorized my career as charitable busy work. What made his condescension particularly grating was how he delivered it with the smug confidence of someone who had never questioned whether success could be measured by anything other than salary figures and corner office square footage. At every family gathering for the past 3 years, Marcus had appointed himself my unofficial career counselor, offering unsolicited advice about transitioning to the private sector and maximizing my earning potential, with the patronizing tone typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to children. The irony, which I had kept carefully to myself, was that Marcus knew almost nothing about what I actually did beyond the oversimplified version he had constructed in his mind. He had never asked about the complexity of my projects, the scope of my responsibilities, or the strategic partnerships I had developed. In his worldview, nonprofit work was inherently less sophisticated than finance, regardless of the actual skills required or impact achieved. This willful ignorance had become a source of private amusement over the years, particularly as I watched Marcus struggle to understand basic economic principles that were fundamental to my daily work. During one memorable family barbecue, he had attempted to lecture me about market dynamics while completely misunderstanding how housing development financing worked. I had listened politely, offering just enough engagement to avoid conflict, while mentally noting the gaps in his supposed expertise. What Marcus definitely didn't know was that I had been carefully documenting every interaction, every dismissive comment, every assumption he made about my career and capabilities. Not out of vindictiveness, but because I had learned early in my professional life that underestimation could be a powerful strategic advantage when wielded correctly. The rain continued to tap against the office windows as I finished reviewing the quarterly impact reports that would be presented to our board next week. Community Development Partners had exceeded every benchmark we had established, leveraging innovative financing structures that had attracted attention from housing advocates across the country. Our model was being studied by organizations in 12 states, and I had been invited to present our methodology at 3 national conferences in the coming months. But none of that would matter to Marcus, who measured success exclusively through the lens of personal financial advancement and corporate hierarchy. In his mental framework, my work remained insignificant because it didn't align with his narrow definition of achievement. The disconnect had become so predictable that I had started treating our interactions like an ongoing case study in cognitive bias and selective perception. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from my grandmother, herself. "Mia, I hope you're still coming tonight. Marcus has been telling everyone about his big promotion at Sterling. I told him you're doing important work too, but you know how he gets when he thinks he knows everything." The message was followed by 3 eye-rolling emojis, which somehow made the situation both more endearing and more frustrating. Abuela. Rosa had always been perceptive about family dynamics, even when she chose not to address them directly. She understood that Marcus's need to position himself as the family's financial success story stemmed from deeper insecurities, but she also recognized that his constant undermining of others was becoming problematic. Over the past year, she had made several subtle attempts to redirect conversations when Marcus launched into his familiar lectures about career advancement and financial responsibility. What my grandmother didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, in my family, was that 3 months ago, I had been approached by someone whose interest in my work would fundamentally alter the power dynamics of tonight's birthday celebration. The conversation had taken place during what I thought was a routine meeting about a housing development project, but had evolved into something far more significant. I gathered my materials and prepared to leave the office, double-checking that the confidential documents I needed for tonight were secured in my briefcase. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Marcus spent considerable energy broadcasting his professional achievements to anyone within earshot, while I had been quietly building something that would make his accomplishments look like preliminary sketches compared to architectural blueprints. The drive to my grandmother's house in southeast Portland gave me time to reflect on how this evening might unfold. Part of me was tempted to let Marcus continue his familiar performance, allowing him to dig deeper into assumptions that would soon prove embarrassingly inaccurate. Another part of me, the part that had grown tired of his condescension, was looking forward to the moment when his carefully constructed narrative would encounter reality. My grandmother lived in a modest ranch-style home that had been in our family for 40 years, its interior walls covered with photographs documenting decades of birthdays, graduations, and celebrations. The house was already full when I arrived, filled with the familiar sounds of my extended family catching up on recent developments and sharing stories about work, relationships, and various ongoing dramas. Marcus was holding court in the living room when I entered, gesturing animatedly as he described some recent triumph at Sterling Financial to a captive audience of aunts and uncles. He wore the expression of someone who had never encountered a professional challenge he couldn't solve through confidence and determination, his voice carrying the particular authority of someone accustomed to being the most financially successful person in any family gathering. "Sofia!" he called out as soon as he spotted me, his tone carrying just enough warmth to mask the condescension that inevitably followed. "I was just telling everyone about the new client acquisition strategies we're implementing at Sterling. You know, real corporate innovation that's driving actual revenue growth." He paused for effect, allowing the implicit contrast with my nonprofit work to register with our relatives. I smiled and hugged him briefly, noting how he had positioned himself near the fireplace where family photos displayed his various achievements over the years. The staging was deliberate, designed to reinforce his status as the family's primary success story. "Congratulations, Marcus. That sounds like important work." My response was neutral enough to avoid conflict while not offering the validation he was clearly seeking. "Important work," he repeated with a slight laugh. That's one way to describe it. We're talking about managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Sophia. The kind of numbers that actually move markets and create jobs for real people. The emphasis on real people was subtle but unmistakable. Another small dismissal of my work-serving communities he apparently didn't consider authentically significant. Our grandmother appeared beside us carrying a tray of her famous empanadas, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the conversation. Marcus, mijo, tell Sofia about your promotion, but remember, she has important news too. Her intervention was gentle but firm, the kind of diplomatic redirect she had perfected. Over 8 decades of managing family personalities, Marcus brightened at the mention of his promotion, clearly pleased to have an excuse to launch into a detailed description of his recent advancement. Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, he announced with the pride of someone unveiling a major accomplishment. Youngest person in the company's history to reach that level. The board specifically cited my innovative approaches to client relationship management and revenue optimization. I listened politely as he elaborated on his new responsibilities, noting how his description focused heavily on impressive-sounding terminology while remaining vague about specific achievements or measurable outcomes. His presentation style was polished, the result of years spent cultivating an executive persona, but the substance felt surprisingly thin when examined closely. "That's wonderful, Marcus," I said when he finished his presentation. "It sounds like Sterling recognizes your potential for leadership." My comment was carefully chosen to acknowledge his achievement without offering the enthusiastic validation he was clearly seeking. "Potential for leadership," he repeated, his expression shifting slightly. "Sophia, I'm not sure you understand the significance of this position. I'm now directly involved in decisions that affect the company's strategic direction. We're talking about real influence, real power in the financial sector." His tone had taken on the particular edge that appeared whenever he felt his accomplishments weren't receiving adequate recognition. Before I could respond, our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my uncle Roberto, who had apparently driven directly from his construction company's job site and still wore work clothes dusted with sawdust and concrete powder. Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at his uncle's appearance, a small tell that revealed his discomfort with family members whose success didn't align with his white-collar aesthetic. "Marcus, I heard about your promotion, Uncle," Roberto said warmly, clapping his nephew on the shoulder. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's fantastic news. Your mother must be so proud." He turned to me with genuine interest. "And Sophia, how's the housing work going? I saw one of your developments featured in the newspaper last month. Beautiful project." I felt a small surge of appreciation for my uncle's inclusive approach to family achievements. Unlike Marcus, who seemed to view success as a zero-sum competition, Roberto had always celebrated everyone's accomplishments without feeling threatened by others' recognition. "Thank you, Uncle Roberto. We've been able to complete some really meaningful projects this year." Marcus jumped back into the conversation before I could elaborate. "Sophia's doing good work, definitely making a difference in her own way. It's just different from private sector leadership, you know? Different scale, different impact, different level of strategic complexity." His words were carefully chosen to sound supportive while actually undermining, a technique he had refined over years of practice. "Different doesn't mean less important," our grandmother interjected quietly, her voice carrying the particular authority that came with 8 decades of observing human behavior. "Sophia's work helps families have homes, Marcus. That seems pretty important to me." Marcus nodded quickly, clearly recognizing that openly dismissing our grandmother's perspective would be socially unacceptable. "Of course, abuela. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I just think Sophia has skills that could be really valuable in the corporate world, where she could have even greater impact through larger-scale initiatives." His recovery was smooth, redirecting potential criticism while maintaining his position, that my current work represented underutilized potential rather than meaningful achievement. The conversation continued in this pattern for several more minutes, with Marcus finding increasingly subtle ways to position his career as more significant while appearing to support mine. His technique was impressive in its consistency, each comment designed to reinforce his superior status while maintaining plausible deniability about any deliberate condescension. What made his performance particularly ironic was how completely he had misread the situation he was about to find himself in. Over the past 3 months, I had been engaged in conversations that would fundamentally alter not just my career trajectory, but the entire context in which Marcus measured professional success. The documents in my briefcase contained information that would transform this familiar family dynamic in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. As dinner was served, Marcus continued to dominate conversations about career advancement and professional achievement, offering unsolicited advice to various cousins about maximizing their earning potential and building impressive resumes. His confidence remained absolute, the certainty of someone who had never encountered a situation where his assumptions about success and hierarchy were fundamentally challenged. I watched this performance with growing amusement, checking my phone periodically for any messages that might require my attention. The evening was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated, with Marcus following his predictable script while completely unaware that the foundations of his worldview were about to shift dramatically. The birthday celebration moved through its traditional phases, with speeches honoring our grandmother's remarkable life and contributions to our family's success across multiple generations. Marcus delivered remarks that somehow managed to reference his own professional achievements while nominally focusing on our grandmother's influence, a skill that demonstrated impressive self-centeredness disguised as familial respect. As the evening wound down and family members began preparing to leave, I realized that the moment I had been anticipating was approaching. Marcus had spent the entire evening reinforcing his narrative about my dead-end nonprofit job and his own superior position in the professional world. He had no idea that in approximately 12 hours, we would find ourselves in a meeting room at Sterling Financial Group, where the actual hierarchy of power would be revealed in a way that would fundamentally challenge every assumption he had made about success, influence, and the relative value of our respective careers. The irony was almost too perfect to believe, but sometimes reality arranged itself in ways that seemed designed specifically to teach lessons about humility and the dangers of underestimating others based on superficial impressions. Marcus had built his entire identity around being the family's financial success story, completely unaware that his little cousin with her dead-end job was about to become something he had never imagined possible. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, Marcus made one final comment that encapsulated everything about his approach to our relationship. "Sophia, I hope you'll seriously consider what we talked about tonight. Sterling is always looking for talented people, and I might be able to put in a good word for you. Obviously, you'd have to start at an entry-level position, but with my guidance, you could probably work your way up to something respectable within a few years." I thanked him for the offer with appropriate graciousness, knowing that in less than 24 hours, he would discover just how profoundly he had misunderstood not just my career, but the entire landscape of power and influence within his own company. The conversation would be one he remembered for a very long time, though not for the reasons he currently anticipated. The drive home through Portland's quiet streets gave me time to reflect on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. What had started as a nonprofit career focused on housing development had evolved into something far more complex and influential than anyone in my family realized. The documents in my briefcase represented not just a career opportunity, but a complete transformation of how power and influence operated in the intersection between public service and private enterprise. Marcus would learn tomorrow that his understanding of success had been embarrassingly narrow, and that his little cousin's dead-end job had been preparing her for responsibilities that exceeded anything he had ever imagined. The revelation would be educational for both of us, though I suspected I would enjoy the learning process considerably more than he would. As I pulled into my driveway, I smiled at the thought of tomorrow's meeting. Marcus had spent years positioning himself as the family expert on professional success and financial achievement. Tomorrow, he would discover that expertise and achievement could take forms he had never considered, and that his little cousin had been quietly building something that would make his accomplishments look like preliminary sketches in comparison to architectural masterpieces. The next morning brought crisp autumn weather and a sense of anticipation that felt like Christmas morning combined with the final day of finals week. I dressed carefully for what would undoubtedly be one of the most significant days of my professional life, choosing a navy suit that struck the right balance between confidence and approachability. The documents in my briefcase had been reviewed multiple times, every detail confirmed and cross-referenced to ensure absolute accuracy. At exactly 9:30 a.m., I received the call I had been expecting. Ms. Ramirez, this is Jonathan Sterling from Sterling Financial Group. I wanted to confirm our meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. I believe your cousin Marcus will be joining us, along with several other senior executives. I'm looking forward to our conversation. The call lasted only a few minutes, but confirmed that everything was proceeding according to plan. Marcus had no idea why he had been asked to attend this meeting, beyond being told that it involved a significant strategic partnership his department might be interested in supporting. The setup was perfect, allowing for maximum impact when the actual purpose of the gathering was revealed. I spent the morning reviewing materials one final time and preparing responses to questions that might arise during the afternoon's discussion. The transformation that was about to occur wasn't just personal vindication, though I wouldn't deny finding satisfaction in the prospect of Marcus discovering how completely he had misunderstood our relative positions in the professional world. More significantly, this represented the culmination of 4 years of work that had started with a simple commitment to affordable housing and had evolved into something far more ambitious and influential. The path from nonprofit program director to corporate board member had been unexpected, but each step had built logically on the previous one, creating opportunities that most people never imagined existed. At 1:45 p.m., I arrived at Sterling Financial Group's downtown headquarters, a gleaming 30-story tower that had been Marcus's professional home for the past 6 years. The building's lobby was designed to impress, with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling, windows that offered spectacular views of the city and surrounding mountains. I had visited once before for a preliminary meeting, but today felt different, charged with significance that went beyond business discussions. The elevator ride to the 28th floor gave me a moment to center myself and prepare for what was about to unfold. In a few minutes, Marcus would discover that his little cousin's dead-end job had led to opportunities he had never considered possible, and that his assumptions about success and influence had been profoundly limited. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the executive floor of Sterling Financial Group, carrying with me the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The meeting that was about to begin would change. Everything Marcus thought he knew about success, family, and the relative value of our respective careers. What happened next would become a story our family talked about for years to come. Though I suspected Marcus's version of events would differ significantly from the reality that was about to unfold in Sterling Financial's largest conference room. The Sterling Financial Group conference room was everything I had expected from Marcus's descriptions over the years, though experiencing it firsthand revealed details his ego-driven narratives had overlooked. The mahogany table could easily seat 20 people, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Portland's skyline, while tasteful artwork and subtle lighting created an atmosphere designed to impress clients and intimidate competitors. Marcus was already seated when I arrived, positioned strategically near the head of the table in a way that suggested he considered himself a key participant rather than merely an attendee. His expression radiated the confident expectation of someone who believed this meeting would provide another opportunity to demonstrate his importance within the company hierarchy. He wore his most expensive suit, the one reserved for what he considered his most significant professional moments. "Sophia," he said with surprise as I entered the room, his tone suggesting he hadn't expected to see me here. "I didn't realize you were involved in this partnership discussion. Are you representing community development partners in some capacity?" His question carried the underlying assumption that my presence must be peripheral, perhaps to provide nonprofit perspective on some minor aspect of whatever deal Sterling was considering. Before I could respond, Jonathan Sterling himself entered the conference room, followed by 3 other executives whose titles Marcus had mentioned reverently during various family gatherings. The CEO of Sterling Financial Group was younger than I had anticipated, perhaps 55, with the kind of understated confidence that came from building something significant rather than simply inheriting it. His presence immediately shifted, the energy in the room, commanding attention without requiring dramatic gestures or raised voices. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jonathan said as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for making time for what I believe will be a very important discussion about Sterling's future direction." His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on each attendee before settling on me with unmistakable recognition and respect. Marcus straightened in his chair, clearly anticipating that this opening would lead to some explanation of his role in whatever strategic initiative was being discussed. His expression carried the particular alertness of someone preparing to contribute meaningfully to high-level corporate planning, the kind of opportunity he had been positioning himself for throughout his career at Sterling. "Before we begin," Jonathan continued, "I want to acknowledge someone whose work has been instrumental in bringing us to this moment. Sofia Ramirez has spent the past 4 years developing innovative approaches to community development and affordable housing that have caught the attention of forward-thinking financial institutions across the country." I watched Marcus's expression shift from confidence to confusion as Jonathan's words registered. This wasn't the introduction he had expected, and the tone suggested something far more significant than the peripheral nonprofit consultation he had assumed my presence represented. His eyes darted between Jonathan and me, trying to process information that didn't align with his understanding of why we were all gathered here. "Ms. Ramirez," Jonathan addressed me directly, "would you mind sharing with the group how your methodology at Community Development Partners has achieved such remarkable results in sustainable housing development?" His invitation was clearly rehearsed, part of a presentation strategy we had discussed during our preliminary meetings over the past 3 months. I opened my briefcase and retrieved the portfolio I had prepared specifically for this moment, aware that Marcus was watching every movement with growing bewilderment. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Over the past 4 years, Community Development Partners has pioneered what we call integrated financing structures that combine public funding, private investment, and community ownership models to create truly affordable housing that remains permanently accessible to working families." As I launched into my presentation, I could see Marcus struggling to reconcile this version of my work with the dead-end nonprofit job narrative he had constructed over the years. The projects I described involved complex financial instruments, sophisticated risk management strategies, and partnerships with major banks and investment firms. This wasn't the simplistic social work he had imagined, but rather a comprehensive approach to economic development that required exactly the kind of strategic thinking he claimed to specialize in. The Portland Heights development, for example, I continued, displaying architectural renderings and financial projections on the room's state-of-the-art presentation system, leveraged $12 million in mixed funding to create 240 units of permanently affordable housing while generating sustainable returns for private investors. The model has been so successful that housing authorities in 8 other cities have requested assistance implementing similar approaches. Marcus's face had gone pale as the scope and sophistication of my work became clear. These weren't the charitable projects he had dismissed during countless family gatherings, but major economic development initiatives that rivaled anything Sterling Financial had undertaken in the community development sector. The numbers alone were impressive, but the strategic complexity and measurable outcomes demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that drives successful businesses. The financial sustainability is particularly noteworthy, added Margaret. Chen, Sterling's chief financial officer, consulting notes she had clearly prepared in advance. Ms. Ramirez's integrated model addresses one of the most persistent challenges in affordable housing by creating revenue streams that support long-term maintenance and community services without requiring ongoing public subsidies. I nodded appreciatively at Margaret's analysis, then continued with additional examples that further illustrated the scope of our accomplishments. The Riverside Commons project took this approach even further, incorporating small business development and job training programs that have created over 300 permanent positions for community residents. The economic impact study showed a return of $4.20 for every public dollar invested. The presentation continued for 25 minutes, with detailed explanations of financing structures, partnership development, and measurable outcomes that painted a picture of sophisticated strategic work rather than the simple social services Marcus had imagined. Each project example built on the previous one, creating a comprehensive portrait of innovation and leadership that extended far beyond traditional nonprofit boundaries. Throughout my presentation, Marcus remained silent, his usual confidence, replaced by visible confusion and something approaching shock. The sister, who had been the target of his career advice for years, was describing accomplishments that exceeded anything he had achieved in his 6 years at Sterling Financial. The cognitive dissonance was apparent in his expression, as years of assumptions about our relative professional standings crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. When I concluded my presentation, Jonathan Sterling leaned forward with obvious satisfaction. As you can see, Ms. Ramirez has developed exactly the kind of innovative approach to community development that aligns with Sterling's commitment to socially responsible investment strategies. Her work demonstrates that financial success and community benefit aren't competing priorities, but rather complementary objectives when approached with sufficient sophistication and strategic vision. Which brings us, he continued, his tone shifting to something more formal and significant, to the reason we're all here today. Sterling Financial Group's board of directors has unanimously approved a proposal to establish a new community development division that will leverage Ms. Ramirez's methodology to expand our impact in affordable housing and economic development across the Pacific Northwest. Marcus straightened slightly, perhaps hoping that this announcement would lead to some explanation of his role in this new division. His expression carried the particular attention of someone preparing to be offered an important position within a significant corporate initiative. After years of positioning himself as Sterling's expert on strategic development, this seemed like the kind of opportunity he had been building toward throughout his career. To lead this division, Jonathan continued, his words measured and deliberate, the board has unanimously elected Sofia Ramirez to serve as chairman of community development and newest member of Sterling Financial Group's board of directors, effective immediately. The silence that followed this announcement was profound and electric. Marcus's expression shifted through several stages of shock, confusion, and disbelief as the implications of Jonathan's words registered. His little cousin, whose career he had been patronizing for years, had just been appointed to Sterling's board of directors while he remained in middle management, still several levels below the executive leadership he had been striving to reach. Chairman, Marcus repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sofia is becoming a board member? The question was directed at Jonathan, but his eyes remained fixed on me with an expression of complete bewilderment. That's correct, Jonathan confirmed with obvious pleasure. Ms. Ramirez will be our youngest board member in Sterling's 60-year history and the first to bring specific expertise in sustainable community development. Her appointment reflects our commitment to expanding beyond traditional financial services into areas where we can create meaningful social impact while maintaining strong returns for our investors. I maintained my professional composure while internally savoring the moment. Marcus's worldview underwent fundamental restructuring. The cousin who had spent years offering unsolicited career advice had just discovered that his dead-end job relative would now be among the small group of individuals who determined Sterling Financial's strategic direction and executive leadership decisions. "The position comes with full board authority," Margaret Chen added, consulting her notes with obvious approval. "Ms. Ramirez will participate in all strategic planning, have input on executive hiring and compensation decisions, and chair the newly formed Community Impact Committee that will oversee our expanded social responsibility initiatives." Marcus looked as though he had been physically struck by this information. The implications were staggering from his perspective. Not only was I joining Sterling's board of directors, but I would now be in a position of authority over his career, advancement, compensation, and potentially his continued employment with the company. The power dynamic he had taken for granted for years had been completely inverted in a matter of minutes. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally, his professional composure beginning to crack. "How did this happen? When did this happen? Sofia, you never mentioned anything about board positions or Sterling Financial during our conversations." His tone carried a mixture of confusion and something approaching accusation, as though I had deliberately deceived him by not sharing information about opportunities he hadn't imagined existed. "The opportunity developed gradually over several months," I explained calmly, enjoying the chance to provide education rather than receive it for once. "Jonathan reached out initially to discuss potential partnerships between Sterling and community development partners. As those conversations evolved, it became clear that there was mutual interest in a more comprehensive collaboration. Jonathan nodded approvingly at my diplomatic explanation, then provided additional context that made Marcus's shock even more pronounced. "Ms. Ramirez's reputation in sustainable development circles is quite remarkable. We first heard about her work through recommendations from 3 different major foundations and 2 federal housing agencies. When we began researching her methodology, we realized that Sterling had been overlooking significant opportunities in socially responsible investment that could benefit both our shareholders and the communities we serve. The due diligence process was extensive," Margaret added with obvious respect. "Ms. Ramirez underwent the same background checks, financial reviews, and professional assessments that we require for all board candidates. The unanimous approval from our current board members reflects not just her innovative work, but her demonstrated ability to manage complex financial instruments and multi-stakeholder partnerships." Marcus was struggling visibly to process this information, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching panic as he contemplated the professional implications of this revelation. His little cousin, whose career he had been dismissing for years, was about to become one of his ultimate supervisors within the company hierarchy. Every condescending comment, every piece of unsolicited advice, every assumption about our relative professional standings was being recontextualized in light of this dramatic role reversal. "The compensation package reflects the significance of this position," Jonathan continued, either unaware of or deliberately ignoring Marcus's obvious distress. "Ms. Ramirez will receive a base director's fee of $300,000 annually, plus equity participation and performance bonuses tied to the division's success metrics. Additionally, she'll have access to Sterling's executive development programs and international training opportunities." I watched Marcus's face as these numbers registered. The base compensation alone was more than double what he earned as senior vice president, and the equity participation would potentially provide returns that exceeded his current total compensation by orders of magnitude. The financial disparity was striking enough, but the authority and influence that came with board membership represented advantages he might never achieve despite years of corporate ladder climbing. "Sofia," Marcus said my name with obvious effort, His voice strained with the challenge of maintaining professional decorum while processing personal devastation. "This is incredible news. I had no idea you were pursuing opportunities in private sector leadership." His attempt at congratulation was undermined by the shock and dismay that colored his expression. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied graciously, recognizing that magnanimity in victory would serve me better than vindictiveness. "I'm looking forward to working with Sterling's talented team to expand our impact in community development. I'm sure there will be opportunities for collaboration between my division and your department as we develop new initiatives." The suggestion that I might now be in a position to offer him career opportunities rather than receive his guidance was the final piece of cognitive dissonance that seemed to break through his remaining composure. Marcus had built his identity around being the family's business success story, the one who understood corporate power and financial achievement. The revelation that his supposedly naive cousin had leapfrogged him in both authority and compensation challenged everything he thought he knew about success and professional hierarchy. "The transition will begin immediately," Jonathan announced, moving the discussion toward practical implementation details. "Ms. Ramirez will spend the next 2 weeks working with our executive team to establish the Community Development Division's operational framework. We'll be announcing the appointment publicly next Monday, along with our expanded commitment to socially responsible investment strategies." As the meeting continued with discussions of office space, staffing requirements, and strategic priorities, Marcus remained largely silent, occasionally offering brief responses when directly addressed, but clearly struggling to maintain his professional facade. The man who had entered this conference room expecting to demonstrate his importance within Sterling's hierarchy was discovering that his understanding of power and influence had been embarrassingly limited. "Marcus," Jonathan addressed him directly toward the end of the meeting, "I hope you'll support Ms. Ramirez's transition and consider ways your department might collaborate with the new Community Development Division. Your experience with client relationship management could be valuable as we expand our services in this sector." The invitation was professionally appropriate, but the implicit hierarchy was unmistakable. Marcus was being asked to support my initiatives rather than lead them, to contribute his expertise to my vision rather than direct his own strategic projects. The role reversal was complete and publicly acknowledged within Sterling's executive structure. "Of course," Marcus managed to respond, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining professionalism. "I'm sure there will be many opportunities for productive collaboration." His words were correct, but his expression suggested he was still processing the full implications of this dramatic shift in our relative positions. As the meeting concluded and participants began gathering their materials, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. Marcus had spent years positioning himself as the family expert on corporate success, completely unaware that his little cousin was developing exactly the kind of innovative leadership that major financial institutions were seeking. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Marcus had built his professional identity around his position at Sterling Financial, using his employment there as evidence of his superior understanding of business and finance. Now, not only was I joining Sterling's leadership at a level he might never reach, but I was doing so based on expertise he had consistently dismissed as irrelevant to serious business success. "Sofia," Jonathan approached as other attendees departed, "I wanted to personally welcome you to Sterling's board. Your vision for sustainable community development represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership our industry needs. I'm confident this partnership will benefit everyone involved." I thanked him for the opportunity and the confidence his team had shown in my capabilities, while noting that Marcus was lingering near the conference room exit, clearly hoping to speak with me privately. His expression carried the particular intensity of someone struggling to reconcile dramatically contradictory information about reality and his place within it. "Marcus," I said as we found ourselves alone in the corridor outside the conference room, "I know this news comes as a surprise. I hope you understand that the opportunity developed gradually, and there wasn't really an appropriate time to discuss it during family gatherings. He nodded slowly, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching vulnerability. Sophia, I owe you an apology. I clearly had no idea what you were accomplishing with your work. I made assumptions that were completely wrong about your career and your capabilities. His admission was genuine, if somewhat forced by circumstances beyond his control. I appreciate that, Marcus, I replied diplomatically. We all see professional success through different lenses. What matters now is moving forward in ways that benefit everyone. My response was carefully chosen to avoid vindictiveness while acknowledging the shift in our relationship dynamics. When you said you were doing important work, he continued, clearly struggling with the implications of his years of condescension, I thought I understood what that meant. I had no idea you were developing strategies that major corporations would want to adopt, or that your expertise was valued at this level in the private sector. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Marcus attempting to process how completely he had misunderstood not just my career, but the entire landscape of what constituted valuable business expertise in the modern economy. His worldview had been fundamentally challenged, and the adjustment was clearly difficult for someone who had built his identity around his understanding of corporate success. As we walked toward the elevators, Marcus asked the question that had probably been consuming him since Jonathan's announcement. What happens now? How does this change things between us and within the family? His concern was understandable, given that our professional relationship had been completely transformed while our family connection remained unchanged. Nothing has to change dramatically, I assured him, recognizing that magnanimity would serve me better than vindictiveness. We're still cousins, and I hope we can find ways to work together productively when our departments have overlapping projects. This is an opportunity for both of us to grow professionally. The elevator. Ride to the lobby was conducted in relative silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Marcus had entered Sterling Financial Group's headquarters that morning as the family's primary business success story, confident in his understanding of corporate hierarchy and professional achievement. He was leaving with the knowledge that his little cousin had not only exceeded his accomplishments, but had done so in ways that made his expertise look preliminary by comparison. As we reached the building's lobby, Marcus made one final attempt to process the day's revelations. Sophia, I need you to know that I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished, even if I'm still struggling to understand how I missed it so completely. Your success reflects well on our entire family. I thanked him for his gracious response to what must have been shocking news, then watched as he walked toward the parking garage with the slightly unsteady gait of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been thoroughly disrupted. The man who had been offering me career advice for years would now be working for a company where I held board-level authority over strategic decisions that could affect his professional future. The drive home gave me time to reflect on the strange satisfaction of this moment. Marcus's condescension hadn't been malicious, merely ignorant, but it had been consistent enough to become genuinely irritating over the years. Today's revelation provided a form of poetic justice that felt almost too perfect to be real. More importantly, the appointment to Sterling's board represented validation of years of work that had been dismissed or undervalued by people who measured success exclusively through narrow financial metrics. The integration of social impact and business strategy wasn't just personally fulfilling. It was proving to be precisely what forward-thinking institutions were seeking in their leadership. That evening, I called my grandmother to share news of the appointment before it became public through official channels. Her response was characteristically insightful and supportive, though she also expressed amusement at how dramatically the family dynamics had shifted in a single afternoon. "Mija," she said with obvious pride, "I always knew you were doing important work, even when others didn't understand it. Marcus is a good boy, but he sometimes forgets that wisdom comes in many forms. This will be educational for him." Her gentle, Assessment of the situation captured something important about family relationships and professional success. Marcus's assumptions had been wrong, but they hadn't been deliberately cruel. The education he would receive from this experience might ultimately benefit both of us by creating a more authentic foundation for our relationship moving forward. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how completely the day had exceeded my expectations. The months of preparation, the careful documentation of achievements, the strategic positioning had all led to this moment when years of underestimation were conclusively disproven through undeniable professional advancement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I began the transition into Sterling's board leadership, but tonight, I was content to savor the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed and assumptions thoroughly corrected. Marcus had learned that success could take forms he had never considered, and I had learned that careful preparation combined with excellent work could lead to opportunities that exceeded even ambitious expectations. The little cousin with the dead-end job was about to become chairman of community development for one of the Pacific Northwest's most prestigious financial institutions, and the family dynamics that had seemed so fixed for years had been permanently and dramatically transformed. In 3 days, Sterling Financial Group would issue a press release announcing my appointment, and Marcus would have to explain to everyone in our extended family how his assessment of our relative professional standings had been so comprehensively wrong. The education would continue, and I suspected it would be beneficial for everyone involved. The next morning brought a flurry of communications as Sterling's executive team began implementing the transition plan we had discussed during yesterday's meeting. My phone buzzed with messages from Jonathan Sterling, Margaret Chen, and several other board members welcoming me officially and providing details about orientation schedules, office arrangements, and the various meetings required to establish the Community Development Division's operational framework. The practical aspects of joining Sterling's leadership were more complex than I had anticipated, involving everything from security clearances to executive coaching sessions designed to prepare new board members for the scope of their responsibilities. The company's commitment to thorough preparation was impressive, reflecting the seriousness with which they approached board appointments and strategic leadership transitions. At 10:30, Margaret Chen called to discuss compensation details and equity arrangements that had been mentioned only briefly during yesterday's meeting. The financial package was even more substantial than Jonathan's summary had indicated, including stock options that could potentially provide significant returns if the Community Development Division achieved its projected growth targets. We're also arranging an executive assistant and dedicated office space on the 29th floor, Margaret explained during our conversation. Jonathan wants to ensure you have all the resources necessary to establish the division successfully. We're treating this as a flagship initiative that demonstrates Sterling's commitment to socially responsible investment strategies. The level of support being provided was gratifying, but also somewhat overwhelming as I contemplated the responsibility that came with such substantial corporate investment in my vision and leadership capabilities. Sterling wasn't just creating a new division. They were betting their reputation on my ability to transform their approach to community development and social impact investing. Around noon, I received an unexpected text message from Marcus. "Sofia, I've been thinking about yesterday's meeting. Would you be willing to have lunch so we can discuss this situation more thoroughly? I feel like I need to understand better how I missed so much about what you were accomplishing." His message was more humble than any communication I had ever received from him, reflecting how thoroughly the previous day's revelations had affected his self-perception. I agreed to meet him at a restaurant near Sterling's headquarters, curious about how he was processing the dramatic shift in our family and professional dynamics. The Marcus who had been confidently offering career advice for years was clearly struggling to reconcile his assumptions with the new reality of our relative positions within the corporate hierarchy. When I arrived at the restaurant, Marcus was already seated at a corner table, his expression carrying the particular intensity of someone who had spent considerable time trying to understand how his fundamental assumptions about reality had proven so completely inaccurate. He stood as I approached, his demeanor far more deferential than anything I had experienced from him in years. "Sophia, thank you for making time for this conversation," he began as we settled into our seats. "I've been replaying yesterday's meeting and trying to understand how I could have been so wrong about what you were doing with your career. I clearly missed something significant about the value and scope of your work." His admission was more thorough than I had expected, suggesting that the shock of yesterday's revelations had prompted genuine self-reflection, rather than mere adjustment to changed circumstances. The Marcus sitting across from me seemed genuinely confused about how his assessment of professional success had proven so inadequate. "I think we all view career advancement through the lens of our own experience," I replied diplomatically. "Your path through Sterling's hierarchy made sense within traditional corporate structures. My work was developing along different lines that weren't necessarily visible from a conventional business perspective." Marcus nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation. "Sophia, it wasn't just that I didn't understand your work. I actively dismissed it as less important than what I was doing. I made assumptions about nonprofit careers that were clearly wrong, and I treated you like someone who needed career guidance, when you were actually developing expertise that exceeded anything I've accomplished." His self-assessment was more honest than I had anticipated, acknowledging not just misunderstanding, but active condescension based on faulty assumptions about the relative value of different types of professional work. The recognition that his behavior had been problematic rather than merely uninformed suggested a level of self-awareness that was encouraging. "The financial aspects alone are staggering," he continued, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and something approaching embarrassment. "Your base compensation as board chairman will be more than double my current salary, and the equity participation could provide returns that exceed anything I might achieve in my current position. I completely misjudged the economic potential of your career path." I appreciated his honest acknowledgement of the financial disparity, while recognizing that focusing exclusively on compensation missed the broader significance of what had occurred. "The money is certainly gratifying," I acknowledged, "but the real satisfaction comes from having the opportunity to implement ideas I've been developing for years. Sterling's support will allow community development partners' methodology to reach a much larger scale." That's what I'm struggling to understand," Marcus admitted, leaning forward with obvious frustration at his own limitations. "You were developing innovative business strategies that major corporations wanted to adopt, and I somehow categorized your work as charitable activity rather than sophisticated economic development. How did I miss the business value of what you were doing?" His question revealed something important about the assumptions that had shaped his assessment of my career. Marcus had been trained to recognize success exclusively within traditional corporate frameworks, making it difficult for him to identify innovation that emerged from nonprofit sectors or social impact work. His blindness wasn't unique, but rather reflected broader cultural biases about where valuable business expertise was likely to develop. "I think the challenge," I explained carefully, "is that innovative work often develops in areas that aren't immediately recognizable to people working within established structures. Community development requires exactly the same kind of strategic thinking and financial sophistication that drives successful businesses, but it applies those skills to different objectives." Marcus listened intently as I elaborated on the complexity of the work I had been doing, describing the multi-stakeholder negotiations, risk assessment strategies, and performance measurement systems that were fundamental to successful affordable housing development. The projects I outlined involved exactly the kind of analytical thinking and strategic planning that he valued in corporate settings, applied to social impact objectives rather than pure profit maximization. The Portland Heights development, for example, I continued, pulling out my phone to show him some of the documentation I had presented yesterday, required coordinating funding from federal agencies, state housing authorities, private investors, and community organizations while ensuring that the financial structure could support long-term affordability goals. The complexity rivaled anything Sterling handles in commercial real estate. As I walked him through specific examples of the projects community development partners had completed, Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching awe. The sophistication of the financial instruments, the complexity of the partnership structures, and the measurable outcomes demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic capability he had spent years trying to develop within Sterling's traditional business divisions. "Sophia, this is extraordinary work," he said finally, his voice carrying genuine admiration rather than the patronizing tone that had characterized our previous conversations about career achievements. "I can see why Sterling's board was interested in bringing you aboard. Your methodology addresses challenges that major financial institutions struggle with, and you've proven that social impact and business success can be complementary rather than competing objectives." The shift in his tone and perspective was remarkable, reflecting how completely the previous day's revelations had altered his understanding of professional expertise and business value. The cousin who had been offering me career advice for years was beginning to recognize that my work involved exactly the kind of innovation that drives successful corporations. "What I'm realizing," Marcus continued, his expression thoughtful, "is that I was measuring success using metrics that didn't capture the full scope of what you were accomplishing. I focused on titles and organizational hierarchies rather than actual impact and expertise development. Your achievements were always substantial. I just didn't have the framework to recognize them." His analysis was more sophisticated than I had expected, suggesting that yesterday's shock had prompted genuine reflection about the limitations of his worldview, rather than mere adjustment to changed circumstances. The Marcus sitting across from me seemed genuinely interested in understanding how his assumptions had proven so inadequate. "The family dynamics are going to be interesting," he observed with a slight smile that carried more self-deprecation than I had ever seen from him. "I've spent years positioning myself as the business expert who could offer guidance to relatives working in other sectors. Now I'm discovering that the cousin I was patronizing has achieved more business success than I'm likely to reach in my entire career." The acknowledgement was gracious, but also revealed something important about how this experience was affecting his self-perception. Marcus had built his identity around his understanding of corporate success and his position within Sterling's hierarchy. The revelation that his little cousin had leapfrogged him professionally while working in a sector he had dismissed was clearly challenging his fundamental assumptions about expertise and achievement. "I don't think you need to completely reconstruct your self-image," I assured him, recognizing that some reassurance might be helpful as he processed these revelations. "You've accomplished meaningful things at Sterling, and your expertise in client relationship management is genuinely valuable. We're just operating in different areas that require different types of strategic thinking." Marcus nodded appreciatively at my diplomatic response, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Sophia, the honest truth is that your appointment to Sterling's board makes my accomplishments look preliminary by comparison. You're now in a position to influence decisions that affect my career, while I'm still working my way up through middle management layers that you've essentially bypassed entirely." The conversation continued for another 40 minutes, with Marcus asking detailed questions about how my opportunities at Sterling had developed and what strategic priorities would guide the community development division's growth. His questions were more sophisticated than I had expected, reflecting genuine interest in understanding business strategies he had previously dismissed as irrelevant to serious corporate work. As our lunch concluded, Marcus made a request that surprised me with its humility and self-awareness. "Sophia, I hope you'll consider me for any opportunities that might arise within your new division. I realize I have a lot to learn about community development, but I'd welcome the chance to contribute to work that creates meaningful social impact while developing new business expertise." The role reversal was complete and explicitly acknowledged. The cousin who had been offering me career guidance for years was now asking for opportunities to work within my strategic vision, recognizing that my expertise had value he had failed to appreciate. The transformation was satisfying, but also somewhat poignant as I watched Marcus grapple with the limitations of assumptions that had shaped his worldview for years. "I'll definitely keep that in mind as we develop staffing plans for the division," I assured him, meaning it sincerely. Marcus's client relationship skills could potentially be valuable in community development work, and his newfound humility suggested he might be genuinely interested in learning, rather than simply advancing his career within Sterling's hierarchy. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to reflect on how dramatically our family dynamics had shifted in less than 24 hours. Marcus's acknowledgement of his misassessment was gratifying, but more importantly, it suggested that the education he was receiving might lead to a more authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. That evening, I spent several hours reviewing materials Sterling's executive team had provided about board responsibilities and the strategic planning process that would guide the Community Development Division's establishment. The scope of authority and responsibility was substantial, requiring careful preparation to ensure I could contribute effectively to Sterling's overall leadership while establishing my division successfully. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. "Mija, Marcus called to tell me about your new position. He sounds very proud, and maybe a little embarrassed about how he's been treating your career. I told him that wisdom sometimes comes through surprises, and this might be good for both of you." Her observation captured something important about the educational value of yesterday's revelations. Marcus had learned that his understanding of professional success was more limited than he had realized, while I had learned that excellent work combined with strategic positioning could lead to opportunities that exceeded even ambitious expectations. The transformation wasn't just personal vindication, though I wouldn't deny finding satisfaction in the complete reversal of assumptions that had shaped our relationship for years. More significantly, it represented validation of an approach to business that integrated social impact with financial success, demonstrating that innovation could emerge from unexpected sources when supported by rigorous methodology and strategic thinking. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I began the formal transition into Sterling's board leadership. But tonight I was content to savor the satisfaction of assumptions thoroughly corrected and expertise finally recognized at its true value. The little cousin with the dead-end job was about to transform how one of the region's most prestigious financial institutions approached community development and social responsibility. 3 months after my appointment to Sterling Financial, Group's board of directors, the Community Development Division, had exceeded every projected milestone we had established during the initial planning sessions. The transformation from nonprofit program director to corporate board chairman had required adjustments I hadn't anticipated, but the opportunity to implement community development strategies at Sterling's scale was proving even more rewarding than I had imagined. The executive floor office that Sterling had provided was a dramatic change from my cramped cubicle at Community Development Partners, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River and sophisticated technology systems that connected me directly with housing authorities, community organizations, and investment partners across the Pacific Northwest. The physical environment reflected the scope of authority and resources now available to advance initiatives I had been developing for years. Marcus had settled into his new role as liaison between my division and Sterling's traditional client services department with surprising grace and genuine enthusiasm. The humility he had demonstrated during our lunch conversation had translated into dedicated effort to understand community development methodology and contribute meaningfully to projects that required exactly the kind of client relationship expertise he had cultivated over his years at Sterling. The collaboration between our departments had produced unexpected benefits for both our professional development and Sterling's strategic positioning. Marcus's experience with corporate clients was proving valuable in securing private investment for affordable housing projects, while my community development background was helping Sterling build relationships with nonprofit organizations and government agencies that had been largely inaccessible through traditional financial services approaches. On a crisp December morning, I was reviewing applications for the Francis Chen Women in Innovation Incubator when my assistant announced that Jonathan Sterling wanted to meet privately to discuss what he characterized as significant developments in the Community Development Division's expansion plans. The urgency in his tone suggested something more substantial than routine progress updates or quarterly planning discussions. When I arrived at Jonathan's office, I found him reviewing documents spread across his conference table with obvious satisfaction. The materials included financial projections, market analysis reports, and what appeared to be correspondence from other financial institutions expressing interest in Sterling's community development approach. "Sophia," he greeted me with enthusiasm that exceeded his usual professional demeanor. "I wanted to share some remarkable news about the impact your division is having, not just within Sterling, but across the entire financial services industry. We're receiving inquiries from major banks and investment firms asking about licensing your methodology for their own community development initiatives." The scope of interest he described was beyond anything I had anticipated when we first discussed establishing the Community Development Division. Financial institutions from Seattle to San Francisco were requesting consultations about implementing integrated financing structures similar to the approaches we had pioneered in Portland. The business model we had developed was apparently attracting attention throughout the Western United States. "The numbers are particularly impressive," Jonathan continued, sliding a summary report across the table. "In 3 months, we've facilitated financing for over 800 affordable housing units, generated $12 million in sustainable returns for Sterling's investors, and established partnerships with 15 community organizations that are requesting expanded collaboration. The success metrics exceed our most optimistic projections." I reviewed the documentation with growing amazement at how rapidly our initiatives had gained momentum. The integration of social impact and financial returns was proving even more successful than the theoretical models had suggested, creating value for all stakeholders while addressing genuine community needs in ways that traditional nonprofit funding could never achieve at this scale. More significantly, Jonathan added with obvious pride, the Board of Directors has unanimously approved a proposal to expand the Community Development Division nationally. We want to establish regional offices in 5 major metropolitan areas within the next 18 months, with you serving as Vice Chairman of National Community Development Operations. The promotion represented another dramatic leap in authority and responsibility, placing me among Sterling's most senior executives while providing resources to implement community development strategies across multiple states. The opportunity was extraordinary, but also somewhat overwhelming as I contemplated the scope of leadership required to manage such rapid expansion. "The compensation adjustment reflects the increased responsibility," he continued, referencing a salary figure that exceeded my current board stipend by nearly 200%. "Additionally, you'll receive equity participation in all regional operations and authority to hire division leadership for each new office. We're essentially creating a subsidiary focused entirely on socially responsible investment strategies." As I processed this information, I couldn't help but think about how completely my career trajectory had diverged from anything Marcus or other family members had imagined possible. The dead-end nonprofit job that had been the target of condescending advice for years had evolved into national leadership of innovative business strategies that were reshaping how major financial institutions approached community development. "There's one additional element to this expansion," Jonathan added with a slight smile, "that I think you'll find particularly satisfying. Marcus has requested consideration for the position of regional director for our planned Seattle office. His work coordinating private investment partnerships has been exceptional, and he's demonstrated genuine commitment to community development principles." The role reversal was complete and officially recognized within Sterling's corporate structure. Marcus would now be seeking career advancement through opportunities created by my strategic vision, reporting to leadership I had established, and implementing methodologies I had developed. The cousin who had spent years offering unsolicited career guidance was building his professional future within the framework of my expertise and authority. "I've reviewed his performance metrics," I replied diplomatically, recognizing that magnanimity in success would serve everyone better than vindictiveness. "Marcus has developed valuable skills in partnership development, and his client relationship experience could be particularly useful in establishing our Seattle operations. I think he would be an excellent candidate for regional leadership." Jonathan nodded approvingly at my assessment, clearly pleased that internal collaboration was supporting the division's expansion plans. The success of our Portland operations had demonstrated that community development could generate sustainable profits while creating meaningful social impact, making the national expansion a logical strategic move for Sterling's long-term growth. That afternoon, I called Marcus to inform him privately about the Seattle opportunity before official announcements were made through Sterling's Human Resources Department. His response was gratifying in its combination of professional excitement and personal gratitude for the recommendation I had provided to Jonathan. "Sophia, I can't adequately express how much this opportunity means to me," he said during our phone conversation. "Working in community development has been more fulfilling than anything I accomplished in traditional client services, and the chance to establish Sterling's Seattle office represents exactly the kind of leadership challenge I've been hoping to find." His enthusiasm was genuine, reflecting how completely his understanding of meaningful career advancement had evolved since learning about my board appointment 3 months earlier. The Marcus who had once dismissed nonprofit work as insufficiently sophisticated now spoke passionately about affordable housing initiatives and sustainable community development, as though they represented the most important business challenges of our generation. "I also want you to know," he continued with characteristic honesty, "that I've learned more about strategic business development in 3 months working with your division than I did in 3 years pursuing traditional advancement. Within Sterling's hierarchy, your approach to integrating social impact with financial returns is genuinely innovative, and I'm grateful for the chance to contribute to work that creates lasting value." The transformation in his perspective was remarkable, demonstrating how direct experience with community development had challenged his assumptions about where sophisticated business expertise could be found and developed. Marcus had discovered that social impact work required exactly the kind of analytical thinking and strategic planning that he valued in corporate settings, applied to objectives that extended beyond pure profit maximization. 6 weeks later, Sterling Financial Group hosted a reception celebrating the official launch of our national community development expansion. The event was held in the ballroom of Portland's most prestigious hotel, with over 200 attendees including city officials, community organization leaders, private investors, and representatives from other financial institutions interested in Sterling's innovative approach to socially responsible investment. My grandmother attended as my guest, wearing an elegant black dress that made her look 20 years younger and carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had always known her granddaughter was destined for significant achievements. Her presence added personal meaning to what was otherwise a professional milestone, representing family recognition of accomplishments that had been undervalued for too long. Marcus delivered remarks during the reception about Sterling's Seattle expansion plans, speaking with confidence and enthusiasm about community development strategies he had been learning to implement over the past several months. His presentation was sophisticated and compelling, demonstrating how completely he had embraced expertise he had once dismissed as irrelevant to serious business success. Sophia's vision for integrating community impact with sustainable financial returns, he told the assembled audience, represents exactly the kind of innovation that will define successful financial services in the 21st century. Sterling's commitment to this approach positions us as leaders in an emerging market that creates value for all stakeholders while addressing genuine social needs. Watching Marcus speak passionately about community development work was both satisfying and somewhat surreal, given his previous dismissal of exactly these types of initiatives. The cousin who had spent years patronizing my career was now building his professional reputation on expertise I had developed, implementing strategies I had pioneered, and advancing within organizational structures I had created. During the reception, I was approached by representatives from 3 major banks interested in licensing Sterling's community development methodology for their own social impact initiatives. The conversations were preliminary, but suggested that our approach to integrating affordable housing development with private investment returns was attracting serious attention throughout the financial services industry. Ms. Ramirez introduced herself Catherine Walsh, Senior Vice President at Pacific Coast Financial. I've been following your work since the Portland Heights development, and I'm incredibly impressed by what Sterling has accomplished under your leadership. We're interested in discussing potential partnerships that could bring your methodology to California markets. Similar conversations occurred throughout the evening, with representatives from financial institutions across the western states expressing interest in collaboration, consultation, or licensing arrangements that could expand the reach of community development strategies we had been refining over the past year. The business model was proving more influential than I had anticipated, creating opportunities for regional and potentially national impact. As the reception concluded, my grandmother and I found ourselves in conversation with Jonathan Sterling and several other board members who had been instrumental in supporting the Community Development Division's establishment and growth. The camaraderie was genuine, reflecting shared satisfaction with achievements that exceeded everyone's initial expectations. Sophia, Jonathan addressed me with obvious pride, when we first discussed bringing you aboard, I was confident your expertise would benefit Sterling's community development initiatives. I didn't anticipate that your leadership would fundamentally reshape how we approach socially responsible investment, or that other institutions would seek to emulate our methodology. His assessment was gratifying, but also highlighted how dramatically my career had evolved beyond anything I had imagined when I first began developing integrated financing structures at Community Development Partners. The work that had been dismissed as a dead-end nonprofit job was proving to be precisely the kind of innovation that major financial institutions needed to address emerging market opportunities. The national expansion represents just the beginning, I replied, gesturing toward the regional directors who would be leading Sterling's new offices. Community development financing is becoming essential infrastructure for sustainable economic growth, and we're positioned to lead that transformation across multiple markets. 2 months later, Marcus called to update me on the progress of Sterling's Seattle office establishment. His excitement was palpable as he described the partnerships he had been developing with Washington state housing authorities and the innovative financing structures they were implementing for affordable housing projects in the Puget Sound region. Sophia, the methodology you developed is working even better than we projected, he reported during our conversation. We've already secured commitments for 6 major housing developments that will create over 400 affordable units while generating sustainable returns for Sterling's investment partners. The integrated financing approach is proving incredibly effective in the Seattle market. His success was gratifying both personally and professionally, demonstrating that the strategies we had pioneered in Portland could be successfully adapted to different metropolitan areas and regulatory environments. Marcus's enthusiasm for community development work had translated into genuine expertise and measurable accomplishments that validated Sterling's decision to expand nationally. More importantly, he continued, I'm learning every day about the complexity and sophistication required for effective community development. This work involves exactly the kind of strategic thinking and analytical rigor that drives successful businesses, applied to objectives that create lasting social value. I can't believe I ever dismissed this sector as insufficiently challenging for serious business professionals. The acknowledgement was meaningful, representing complete recognition of expertise he had once categorized as irrelevant to legitimate career advancement. Marcus had discovered through direct experience that social impact work required the same intellectual capabilities and strategic skills he valued in traditional corporate settings, while creating outcomes that extended far Beyond quarterly profit maximization, 1 year after my appointment to Sterling's board of directors, the Community Development Division had facilitated financing for over 3,000 affordable housing units across 5 metropolitan areas, generated $48 million in sustainable returns for investors, and established Sterling as the recognized leader in socially responsible community development financing throughout the Western United States. The success had attracted national attention, with business publications featuring articles about Sterling's innovative approach to integrating social impact with financial returns. Harvard Business School had requested permission to develop a case study about our methodology, while 3 federal agencies had invited me to serve on advisory committees addressing affordable housing policy and sustainable development financing. Marcus had been promoted to Regional Vice President for Pacific Northwest Operations, overseeing Sterling's community development initiatives in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. His success in establishing the Seattle office had exceeded all projections, leading to additional responsibilities and recognition as one of Sterling's most effective emerging leaders in sustainable development financing. The transformation of our family dynamics had been equally dramatic, with Marcus becoming one of my most enthusiastic supporters and effective advocates within Sterling's executive structure. Our relationship had evolved from condescending advice-giving to genuine collaboration and mutual respect, based on shared commitment to innovative business strategies that created measurable social impact. During our family's celebration of my grandmother's 81st birthday, Marcus delivered a toast that perfectly captured how completely our relative positions had been transformed over the past year. "To Sophia," he said, raising his glass, toward me with obvious pride, "who taught me that the most sophisticated business expertise can develop in unexpected places, and that success can be measured by the lasting value we create for our communities as well as our shareholders." The sentiment was gracious and genuine, reflecting how thoroughly his understanding of professional achievement had evolved since discovering that his little cousin's dead-end nonprofit job had prepared her for leadership opportunities he had never imagined possible. Marcus had learned that innovation could emerge from sectors he had dismissed, while I had learned that excellent work combined with strategic positioning could lead to influence that exceeded even ambitious expectations. As I reflected on the remarkable journey from nonprofit program director to national leader in community development financing, I was struck by how completely the narrative had been transformed. What had begun as a story about family condescension and career underestimation had evolved into something far more significant about the value of innovative thinking, the importance of recognizing expertise wherever it develops, and the satisfaction that comes from building something that creates lasting positive impact. The cousin who had mocked my dead-end job was now building his career within the framework of my expertise and authority, implementing strategies I had developed, and advancing through opportunities I had created. The irony was satisfying, but, more importantly, the collaboration was generating results that benefited everyone involved while addressing genuine community needs at unprecedented scale. Sterling Financial Group's community development initiatives were reshaping how major financial institutions approached socially responsible investment, while my work was influencing policy discussions at state and federal levels about sustainable development financing. The little cousin with the supposedly insignificant nonprofit position had become a recognized leader in business innovation that was attracting attention throughout the financial services industry. The story that had begun with condescending text messages about layoffs and dead-end careers had concluded with national leadership of initiatives that were creating lasting value for thousands of families while generating sustainable profits for investors. Marcus had learned that success could take forms he had never considered, while I had learned that preparation combined with excellent work could lead to opportunities that exceeded even the most ambitious expectations. Most importantly, our family had learned that wisdom and expertise could develop in unexpected places, and that the most significant innovations often emerged from sectors that traditional corporate thinking had overlooked or undervalued. The education had been beneficial for everyone involved, creating stronger relationships built on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. The Community Development Division continued to grow and expand its impact, while Marcus continued to advance his career within the structure of my strategic vision. Our collaboration had become a model for how family relationships could evolve when based on genuine recognition of each other's capabilities rather than superficial assumptions about professional hierarchy and success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.